All right, my name is James Michael Hoover. Everybody calls me Jim. I served 20 years in the United States Air Force, went in as an Airman basic, came out as a captain. And they pay me once a month not to show up for work nowadays. My experience at Nakhon Phanom, Thailand was as an E3, an Airman first class. I was a security policeman, worked 4 or 5 different jobs there, and we'll go into those later. I have 5 friends on that wall, some of them closer than others, some of them just passing acquaintances, and one a kid I grew up with, and one I went to high school with. So I'm with you, pal. I'm with you, Rich. Okay, I joined the Air Force because I was a draft dodger. Yeah, I didn't want to go in the Army, and the Marines were pulling everybody in. And my uncle had been in the Air Force, and I thought about the different things, you know, the aerospace team, and I had watched Walter Cronkite's Air Power series, and that had always interested me about aircraft and space. We were about ready to go into space. Those were the times right after Chuck Yeager, who, by the way, I met later in my career, had busted the sound barrier, first man, out of Edwards Air Force Base. He was a captain at the time, retired as a brigadier. But I was interested in the Air Force. So I said, oh, I've always been interested in it. Why not join and not get drafted? So I did, got in on a 3-month delay in enlistment, and they made me a security policeman after basic. And they sent me direct duty assignment because I already had a college degree. They figured I didn't need tech school, but I could have used it. Anyway, they sent me to Vandenberg Air Force Base, where I served and learned a lot of the basics. And sometimes some of the, I took karate classes and stuff like that as a policeman. Sometimes you can use that type stuff. And my whole body's a weapon. Everybody says it's offensive. So I met my wife there, and how I met her was my friend had been in a motorcycle accident, and I went to the hospital. He was a good buddy. He was a staff sergeant. I was only a 2-striper, but he needed somebody to bring him his checkbook, bring him his mail, so I'd see him like almost every day. And she came in, and this nurse came in, first lieutenant, and here I am, just an airman, and she gave him a shot. And he says, her shots don't hurt. I like that. And I said, she's kind of cute, isn't she? And she walks out, like I shouldn't have said that in front of her. So the next day I come in, and he's from Boston, okay? And he calls me Dover instead of Hoover. So here it goes. Hey, Dover, you know that noise you liked? I said, well, yeah, I think she's sitting out there. I said, she's cute. And he says, I got you fixed up with a date with her for Sunday. I said, oh, you didn't do that? Oh, come on. You know, an idle mind is the devil's workshop. So anyway, he says, all you got to do is go out to the desk where she's taking her notes, and you just ask her what time. So I go out to the desk, and I waited my turn till she looked up. You know, she was an officer. So I said, hi, I guess we're going out Sunday. What time do you want me to pick you up? And she says, I have no idea what you're talking about. He had set me up, okay? Dirtiest trick, but my marriage has lasted 53 years for her, so it must have worked somehow. Anyway, you may film her later, we don't know. But I was, 3 months after I was married to her at Vandenberg Air Force Base, I was reassigned to Nakhon Phanom, Thailand, where the real adventure started. I did more growing up at that 1 year in Thailand than I did anywhere. I started out on B flight, swing shift, security, and I worked on the flight line, and I worked in the perimeter. I used to get in a Jeep and drop the Thai guards off at various sandbag bunkers and try to remember where they were and come and pick them up later. And I brought them water and chow. They did a lot of rice, and it was sticky rice in a brick wrapped in a leaf, which was not what we ate. We ate food from the Skyraider Inn, the chow hall. You've probably heard that one, Rich. And the food wasn't bad there. I ate 4 meals a day there, and I lost 30 pounds. Sometimes I ate, when I was on duty, we did C-Rats, the little box with the P43 to open up the cans with, and there's 4 cigarettes and the chiclets gum and the god-awful food. But, so then I heard of a job opening. One of the guys was leaving at the jail. He was just normal rotation, and he was working day shift, and I liked day shift. So I talked to the sergeant in charge of our jail there, which was also correctional custody. Correctional custody is a lower level of imprisonment where you need correction. And so there were different rules for that, but it's basically the same thing. And when I wasn't on the jail, working the jail, you only were there when you had prisoners. I would be doing various law enforcement duties as opposed to security duties, which I had done. And so I worked the main gate, and we saw the guys coming back on the 6 o'clock bus, wondering why they were there, but never banging on anybody or arresting them or apprehending them for being off base after curfew. But we let them back in to go to work. We had a town patrol. If you caused trouble, especially after 10 o'clock, you were in big trouble. The town patrol would pick you up. But we kind of turned our head the other side for these guys who stayed downtown overnight, whatever they were doing. And so I worked the main gate. I worked the Thai checkpoint, which was way up there. And at the very front of the base where the perimeter began. And we were to watch the cardboard village, which was not made of cardboard, but it looked like it. It was out there, and we knew Viet Cong were out there, but there were families out there, and they were friendly people. And we would make sure that we were the first line of defense, and then we'd call in our radio if there was a problem coming in. I never had a problem like that. But one day, and this is kind of an interesting story, I was surrounded by construction workers. The women did all the coolie work. They wore those pointed hats that are straw and come around down here. And they did the pick and shovel work. Not my choice, ladies, if you're watching this, but that's the culture there. And the men would drive the backhoes and the equipment. And all the men and women were near the Thai checkpoint, and they were looking into a gully. There was a gully behind me, and they go, "Oh, oh!" So I went over there because I was a policeman, and I went over there, and there was a snake about that long in the gully, and they looked very frightened, these people. So I took a shovel, and I cut the snake in half. Then I got a lot closer to his head and chopped his head off, and he was a goner. He wiggled a little bit. And then all those Thai people, all those construction workers, Dum Luit, like I was a big hero. Dum Luit, means policeman. And so I was the hero of the day. Well, the base veterinarian was there. He came down because we had one assigned because of the canine dogs that the security police used. And the first words out of his mouth after I saluted him, 2 stripes versus a captain, were, "You're not supposed to kill the local wildlife." He had to say that. But he had enough sense to know that. So my response probably wasn't the best response, but I said, "Sir, he was frightening the local construction workers here," and I had to make a decision, and a quick one. He says, "Do you know what kind of snake that is?" No, this black snake about that long, you know. He said, that's called a two-step viper. If it bites you, you had 2 steps before it froze your nervous system and you would have been a goner. Okay. Moving right along, there must be another story behind this. I was Thai checkpoint and I was at main gate, and then one of the guys rotated and they needed somebody to guard the officer Hooches. The officer Hooches were the pilot Hooches, and a few of the line officers who were in regular Hooches were the officers. The flying officers had air-conditioned trailers, or Hooches, some of each. And then there was General Butcher. He was in charge of Task Force Alpha. Many of the guys here at our reunion remember General Butcher. And I didn't know General Butcher from Adam, but I was told to watch out for his make sure nobody was in his area. It was more of a compound area, so he had a little double safety. Later they moved the base commander and the wing commander in that same compound with not quite as fancy a trailer, but air-conditioned quarters for them. But I got to know the regular officers, the flight officers, quite well, because they'd be flying all night. Then they'd go to their squadron bar, and I would go into the squadron bar, and as part of my routine check, I was a policeman. I was a roving foot patrol, and they said, "You can't wear your hat in here." I said, "I'm under arms, Captain." And so then they started talking to me, and they gave me Coke because I was on duty, Coca-Cola, and I couldn't drink they'd offer me alcohol, but I couldn't do that carrying a gun. So I was straight arrow on that. And they tell me their stories about flying. And they were great guys. And I learned so much. I said, maybe I should have gone pilot. I had a college degree, but I figured I'd just finish up what I was doing here. And a lot of heroics, a lot of near-death experiences in aircraft. One of them that I know didn't come back. And I went up to the squadron commander and I said, "Commander, I'm Airman Hoover, and I was on Hooch watch. And I knew this man, and I would like to participate somehow." So they had me carry the flag into the memorial service. He was shot down and never came back over Laos. And I was one of 4 men to carry the flag and the 2 rifles and the Air Force flag. And it was a very moving experience to me because that was the first. I had seen men die, but never in the military before. So then...
Do you recall who that was?
No. I dug through the annals. All I know is I was very sad. He had a flat top haircut, he had buck teeth, and he liked to play with a pet snake that was non-poisonous.
Was that Georgia, the snake they had?
Yes.
Yes.
Georgia the snake. Thank you. Boy, that was 50-some years ago. You're good.
Do you know what they did with that snake? They had a bunch of Green Berets had come back from a mission and they stopped, or they dropped them off at KP, and they were all having a good evening, and nobody told the Green Berets about Georgia. Well, they told the guys that you can take our bunks, go in and sleep.
Yeah.
When Georgia got cold, and she crawled into bed with one of those Green Berets that had no idea. He just woke up screaming, "Oh my God," that the snake had crawled into bed with him. So everybody had a good laugh.
Oh, wow.
That poor guy had come out of the bush and survived everything in the bush, and they got scared to death at NKP by Georgia.
Yeah. Did his wife know that he was sleeping around?
Oh, that's funny. But yeah, I've heard a lot of stories about Georgia.
Okay, so you know about Georgia. The lieutenant that took most care of it was killed. And they did a search and rescue with the A-1Es for him, and they had the Jolly Green with the pararescue guy there, and they even sent in a Pedro, but they never could find the guy, and the assumption is that he was killed in the crash. I don't know if there was anything that ever came of it. Hawaii has a place where they still identify in Honolulu there, the base there, where they try to identify, but I cannot remember the officer's name. He was a first lieutenant, and I called him sir. You know how that goes.
Yep.
So I was fat, dumb, and happy doing that, and I ran. One day I was hiding in the bushes near General Butcher's trailer, and I spent, I don't know, quarter of my time watching that trailer, looking around for anything that was different. And out comes this guy. Well, he's a white guy, but he's in a light blue flight suit. Well, I wasn't an officer. I didn't know that they had what's called party suits. And he was wearing this party suit. Well, I didn't see any rank. Turned out the rank was up here, way up here, and I couldn't see it. So I came out of the bush with my hand on my pistol, not pulled, but right down here. And I said, halt, who goes there? Friend or foe? Just like you learn in the John Wayne movies. And he stopped. And he froze for just a minute. And he says, I'm General Butcher. Well, I almost urinated in my pants. I could see the court martial torturing me to death. He said, who are you? I said, I'm Airman Hoover, and I'm here to guard your trailer and the other officer trailers and Hooches. I'm with security police. And I lifted up my badge so he could see it, just to make sure. And I got a little closer. I didn't ask for his ID, but I finally saw a star here and a star there. Well, you're a two-striper, man, like, wow. And he says, well, Hoover, am I ever glad you're here to protect myself? Okay, sort of like he says self. And he said, do you come here often? And I gave him my general schedule. I said, we vary our times here. We just look. It's not a constant guard. He says, I really appreciate it. Then we sat down. He says, sit down. So we sat down on the grass. Me and this one-star general, okay, Butcher, and he later went to Italy and served with some of my other friends. But we would watch the construction equipment. He says, I always wanted to be in construction. I love construction equipment. And here's the Thai men driving the gear. And we had I guess we talked for 20 minutes. And I saw him several times after that, but we didn't have discussions like that ever again. But I won't say he was a troubled man, but he was a man deep in thought. And his thought, Task Force Alpha, he was in charge of all of Thailand's task forces. Some of them were in Laos. You may have heard about Lima Site 85. You can do that with someone else. I had a friend who was killed there. Actually, I had a friend whose grandfather was killed there, to be specific. I don't steal honor. And he would gather all this information and feed it into the computers at Task Force Alpha, which was also an air-conditioned building with giant computers in it. And are you familiar with Task Force? Okay, so just very briefly,
that's very top secret.
Very top secret at the time. But what they would do is some aircraft would go along and drop sensors along the trail. and they drop them here, there, and everywhere, and of course mark them with, forget the proper term, but
Have you ever seen those? They look like bamboo trees.
Exactly.
Seed the trail. It was amazing what they had.
yes, I had seen some, but they were being loaded. They weren't, because I wasn't on the trail, so to speak. And they would load them, and then they'd take the coordinates. That's the word I was looking for. And they'd send those coordinates back to Task Force Alpha. Task Force Alpha would hear a truck coming, and it would go click back to Task Force Alpha. Then they'd hear the next click, and the next one, and they go distance equals rate times time. It's not a real hard thing. You learn it in 3rd grade. And they'd know exactly where to send an aircraft to bomb that truck. Well, then the Viet Cong started riding bicycles, and it wasn't so easy, because motors on vehicles, motor vehicles, set off those sensors. So, excuse me. Here's to you, folks.
But yeah, Task Force Alpha was, it's the predecessor to today's modern military intel gathering. It was the first of all digital. I mean, it was amazing what they did then.
I never got to go inside. We had a security policeman who took that 7 days a week. He wanted to be there. He wanted to recognize everybody. He never took a day off. And he was the daytime man to let people in and out. And of course he did everything on personal recognition, although you had to have a badge. Mm-hmm. And so that was Task Force Alpha, what they did. Me and the general. And so I made a mistake, just one mistake. And I ran into this old sergeant who had been a Korean War veteran and had some great old war stories. He was a master sergeant. I think he was what they called permanent master sergeants. They never got beyond that because of Korean War agreements. But he was typing an APR, an Airman Performance Report, on one of his troops, and he was doing click, click, space, click, hunt and peck method. And I said, Sergeant, could I help you? I just felt sorry for him. And could I help you? Because I'm a touch typist. I can have this done in no time. So the only thing that slowed me down was some of his misspellings and comma splices, that type of stuff. So I said, can I correct these so it'll pass the CBPO? And he said, sure. So an hour later, we're done. He walks it into the orderly room, and he says, here's my APR. The OIC of the orderly room, or the first sergeant, takes a look at it. He says, this is the best one you've ever done. I don't have to send it back. He says, mistake. Oh, Hoover typed it for me. So they dragged me in off my duties, and they took me into the orderly room. So instead of working 8-hour shifts, plus all the times they called you up, for alerts, I would type APRs and declarations. And we had some guys who flew in the helicopters and machine gunners and security policemen. And I'd type those up, and I'd type them all up. And I was pretty good. I got it done. I had a lot of time off, but I still had to sit there from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. with a little time off for chow. So long hours. That was my mistake. I got stuck in that office for all those long hours.
What does they say? Never volunteer, never show them you could do it.
The second part is exactly where I made my mistake. But I helped the guy out, and that's kind of in my heart to help people out.
That probably led you to a whole different facet in the military.
Right.
Going through those channels. It's funny how life takes us in different avenues, just by chance instances.
And when I got back to the States, they said, Hoover, you can type, it says here, and you worked in the orderly room. And so they moved me around to all kind of office work. And there was an opening at the base commander's office. So I went there, and I was his base commander's chief clerk. and worked very well with everybody. They liked me. I was a little more, because I was a security policeman and my shoes were always spit shined, excuse that word, expectoration shined. And my uniform was always pristine, and they really liked me, and they recommended me for officer training school. And so as a staff sergeant, I went to officer training school and became a second lieutenant, worked with the IG, 9th Air Force IG later in my career, or as my first assignment. Then I went to England. I'm spinning this down. I went to England, Mildenhall, where I worked with a spy network with the SR-71. As a matter of fact, the NSA was there, the OSI, the FBI was down in London, the American Embassy. I was a courier commander.
What year is this?
This was, oh my goodness, 77 to 80. So I went there, and I don't talk about too much of it because I don't talk about people or specific places, but there were 28 spy agencies then. There's 17 under Homeland Security. Things changed. So I worked with all 28 of them, some to a lesser degree, but we always got their material to them in a secure and expeditious hand-carried way. I know that they send stuff through the computers now, and I'm not real confident that works, but there's nothing like hand-carrying something. I actually had the honor of taking a message from President Carter, who was president then, to Prime Minister Callahan, and I worked through an intermediary, of course. He was before Mrs. Thatcher. And I also carried a message to the NATO commander, and I had to hand carry it to him only. They wouldn't accept an intermediary, and the guy in between insisted. I said, it says right here, I give to 4-star general. And the major was PO'd, but I don't care. I follow orders. And so I walked in, and he says, how do I know that this is from General so-and-so? He looked at me, he says, who are you? Why do you have to bother me? Type look. I said, how do I know this is, sir, I have a chain of receipts I can prove to you that it's his. Okay, good. Don't need to see him. Bye. So this was Rogers, who was the 4-star in charge of NATO. Very tough Army guy. And of course, I was dressed in civilian clothes because of what I did. And I don't think he liked that either, but that's too bad. And so I did that, and then I went to Edwards Air Force Base, California. I replaced a guy at the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory who had had a heart attack, a captain, and I worked there with the rocket scientists, who were really a bunch of brilliant guys. I think the average degree there was a master's degree, and very, very smart. Liquid rocket propulsion, solid rocket propulsion. They had a testing group, and they had, well, let's just say an experimental group. And they came up with the ideas. And I was the personnel officer, I was the admin officer, I was the protocol officer. I had to set up for different things, so learned a lot there. And then I went down to main base and took a regular command, Air Force, it was the headquarters squadron, and I also had the AFFTC, the general, and his staff under me. So the general was two jumps up from me from a commander, but I was his squadron section commander. So I had to weigh him in once a year, and I had to get him to run a mile and a half, and I'd run with him to pace him because he wasn't a spring chicken. And he was a great guy, And so that was, then I had run 2 combined federal campaigns as an additional duty. They took me, I increased from the first year to the second year like $50,000. They said, Hoover, you deserve something. And they said, what do you want? I said, I want to retrain into contracting so I know what to do, something to do. They don't have squadron commanders out in civilian life. And he said, okay, you're in. So they moved me to contracting. I contracted for the same people who did the rocket propulsion. I did all kinds of scientific studies, some Star Wars stuff that I believe is still classified today. And then it came time to move. 6 years at one base, 3 different assignments. They moved me from Edwards to, believe it or not, Pratt and Whitney Aircraft Company. There was a small operating location there with about 6 officers, no enlisted this time. And we bought engines for the Navy, the F-14, the F-18. For the Air Forces was the F-16 and the F-15. So we did that, plus we had the presidential aircraft engine, which, big deal. And
Huge deal.
it was in for overhaul. And so I went down there to check it, and I made some people really upset because of my security background. I walked out the front door, and I walked around to the parking lot, and I walked right through a wide open door, and I walked over to the presidential aircraft engine, and I put a Coke can there. And there was a note on a rubber band there that says, please see Captain Hoover. They brought it to me, and I caught him for insecure doors for a classified engine. And I didn't take it I did take it to our security officer, but I mainly took it to the president of Pratt and Whitney Aircraft, Mr. Thomas, excuse me. And I said, we just can't have that. We gotta lock these doors. And he said, I thought he was gonna scream and yell at me, but I was right. And he just was very humble. He says, that'll be taken care of today, probably before you leave my office. And he offered me a drink. I don't drink on duty. So he was very cordial, very receptive. But to me, that was an important thing. Little story that's lost in history, but that's it. Then I retired, and I got a job locally. Contract administrators were at a premium in aerospace companies, and so I worked 13 years in aerospace, got another retirement out of it. And because of Agent Orange, I started having heart trouble and had to take an early retirement. I could only work 6 hours a day.
It's funny, people don't realize how much Agent Orange was in Nakhon Phanom. One of the gentlemen that gave me his films, he gave me 180 reels of 8mm film. And one of his first duties was he was flying a C-123. They would load it on the aircraft, and he would fly it to wherever, but it was all based right out of there where he was, and he would take it and deliver it wherever. And I mean, he had films, and it was just there. Literally, it was a sea of 55-gallon drums. All the drums just stacked as far as you could see them. And
yep.
I was amazed at how much was there.
Let me add to that. I guarded the 123s. It was called Project Helping Hand. Okay, the C-123s were the ones that did it because they had 2 prop jobs and 2 jet engines, so they could do their drop and get the heck out of there quick. So we
Ranch Hand.
I'm sorry.
Ranch Hand.
Helping Hand is a different one. Ranch Hand, Project Ranch Hand. If you looked in the base phone book, you could see Ranch Hand in the phone book. And I guarded those planes, so that's probably where I picked it up. Except I could have picked it up on the perimeter. But the attitude is what maybe you don't know about. I was a security policeman. We used to put security policemen all around the perimeter of the base. We had Thai guards all around the perimeter. They were a little further out in the more dangerous areas. And we were concerned as riflemen about all the trees that were around us and the snipers that could be there. Captain Brady, our OIC, I brought it up to Captain Brady, and he says, what the heck you want me to do about it? Well, Admiral Zumwalt decided to get rid of it around all the bases. And they got rid of all the foliage, so I felt good about it. Little did I know that it was almost going to kill me. 25 years, in 2 days, I'll have had heart trouble for 25 years. I don't know how I'm still alive. Good doctors, good pacemaker, good medicines, but I don't know how I'm still alive from that. I have been to too many funerals of guys who have died, especially from cancer. What's that little green thing in there? But they're all died of cancer. I got heart, and they were able to keep me alive. So here I am. I go to reunions. I help Barry with this reunion, the NKP reunion. I believe we're going to go to Colorado in 2 years. Little advertisement. And that's my story. You got any questions, Rich?
I want to thank you, and I want to tell people, if you ever get an opportunity to be around some of the veterans like you, or go to a reunion, the knowledge and the love and watching the camaraderie when the guys come together is one of the most beautiful things that you'll ever do. Question-wise, I was going to ask you, while you were working security at Nakhon Phanom, I heard early on, because Nakhon Phanom was basically just carved out of the jungle in the middle of nowhere, and it was a top secret base. Were you there? Because I'd heard early on there was a lot of black market, there was a lot of thievery going on. What were you protecting from people getting in and out from the locals? Did that happen?
Great question. First of all, we had PSP runways, which are metal plates, very thick steel plates with holes in them so the airplanes could land. When I was there, they had just started making the cement runways. So it was a work in process. Working the main gate was interesting because we could frisk the men, but women, it would have been against their culture also. So once in a while we would bring a woman in, but why did we bring a woman in? Well, according to the OSI, these women would come out, they had a skirt, and they would take their skirt and they'd pull it up and they'd tuck it in here, and their legs would show. But leaving, they would have a blouse and take the skirt and pull it down, and it was almost to the ground. And as they walked out, you would hear clang, 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 clang. Well, it was from the Officers Club and the NCO Club and the Hooches, and it was aluminum cans. OSI traced them and told us that we had to stop them. Well, you can't frisk them, so you got to bring a lady in. So we had like a couple of ladies somewhere one of them was a major, and she was in charge of the CBPO, the personnel office, and she'd come now and then down and check the women, and she'd lift up the skirt, and here's all these Coors cans and Budweiser and Black Label, if you ever heard of that beer. That was popular over there. You could get that for a nickel a can. And Coke and sodas, whatever. And what they were doing is they were taking those down, and if you've ever seen Gone with the Wind and the women had the big dresses, that's what these women looked like coming out. They stuffed as much of that stuff they did. But they took the aluminum, they took it downtown, It was transported to North Vietnam, and I'm not sure exactly where the bomb productions were made, but they melted it down and turned it into bombs to kill us. Have you heard this? Well, that is my little piece of the action to answer your question, and that is as true as the day is long. And there's a guy here that could verify that with me. So
that's amazing. I did not know that that's what they were using. I was figuring they were taking it, stealing it, using it, selling it, but they were actually transporting it north.
They were. Those cans went north. And Tauquet, okay, bear in mind, Nakhon Phanom Air Base was here. 10 miles was Nakhon Phanom City. The Mekong River came right next through the city, by the city, and you go across the river 1 mile-ish, and you would get to Tauquet, which was an R&R center for the Viet Cong. And so they were right across the river from us. And so that, I'm not exactly sure of how they logistically moved it, but we know exactly through our spies that how it happened and how it was used against us, our own beer cans.
Wow. I have never heard that. That is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Tauquet was an interesting city. They'd go there, and we don't know how many were there. We were told one time there were 50,000 Viet Cong in that city. Well, we had 375 security policemen, and plus augmentees, and they were good guys, but they didn't have the same training we did. But you figure the odds if they decided to come across the river into Thailand. Of course, that they would have met with Thai military, which was probably another 40 we could add to us. But had they decided to come over, and every now and then, one of them would get drunk on what's called Mekong, which is not an alcohol, it is a formaldehyde. So it didn't take, they drink formaldehyde. And it took about 2 drinks, and that's about like a bottle of bourbon. It really knocked them out. I never bothered with this stuff myself, but they get high up, and they go up the river on the Laos side, and swim across or boat across somehow and come down and try to get into our base to blow up an airplane. If they had to crawl through concertina wire, you know, the blades, and they were wearing black tights. Once they got through the concertina wire, there was a path about 8 to 12 feet wide that Westinghouse had put pressure sensors on. Dogs would all the time get in there and step on those pressures, and we'd have false alarms. But they'd get on there, and we knew they were on our base then, see? And we had more false alarms than real alarms, but when we had a real alarm, it was serious time. And NKP was divided into sectors A through Z, and I was in S, and one of them got through on T. And I did hear gunshots, and I heard the guy from Oklahoma was next to me in T, and he told me he saw somebody. I believe him. And so then we would launch we had armored personnel carriers that drove like tanks, and they would have, I don't know, 12 to 16 backup security police in them, and they would go to that sector to back it up. And we were supposed to capture them and interrogate them. And I'd have probably just shot them. Maybe not killed them, but wounded them, because they had satchel charges on them. And their mission was to run and find an airplane and to blow up the airplane. That's probably why we put revetments up, to protect from bombing and from perpetrators like this.
They found that out, I think it was Benoit. There was a accidental discharge or some kind of weapon had gone off on the flight line, and they didn't have revetments. And I mean, it took out tons of aircraft. I think it was Benoit for that.
That could be. I don't.
But the revetments separated things so you didn't have collateral damage or another
Right.
thing catching on fire. Yeah.
Right, but it also protected you from perpetrators. Now, what I found interesting, and I'll make this my last point unless you got another question, is one of our guard points for security police was guarding the entry to a dual area. POL was here, that stands for petroleum, oil, and lubricants. And over here was munitions. Now the munitions were generally not armed, but had we had someone blow up the munitions area, and it was next to the oil and petroleum and gas, avgas area, you would have had the 4th of July and no more Nakhon Phanom. And I kept talking to my officers about it and my senior NCOs, just keep guard. But we were very close, far in. We were a close in guard, and there were levels people would have had to get through to do that, but it's a what-if scenario military, and that's what we have to do.
Jim, I want to thank you so much. It has been my pleasure and my honor to interview you. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Well,
I want to ask you one
go
question.
ahead.
And I ask all guys this question at the end. Would you recommend the military as a way of life for some gentleman, some lady today?
Yes and no. Things are changing. The camaraderie is different. And there's some political changes that I'm not so sure are going to remain. But it's not conducive to working together as a team. And everything in the Air Force was the aerospace team. The recruiter had it on his window, I remember that, joined the aerospace team. And people are not working together, they're splitting apart right now. Did I have a great time? Did people who followed me? It was a great career. I learned, I matured. I learned to make good decisions in my own life, but I'm not real sure about today. I'd have to take a closer look at it, but right now I'm iffy on that answer. Now you asked me if I had anything else to say.
Yes, please.
This is maybe inappropriate, but when I was in Thailand on June the 10th, 1970, I had been in the chapel and I met a missionary there. And he told me he had a wife and a kid or 2 kids, whatever, downtown. And he invited me to come to his home. So I got some extra sea rats because he had told me he had nothing to eat but on the economy rice and their fish and sticky rice. And it wasn't that good. So I took them some sea rations, which included applesauce and spaghetti. They were extras. I didn't steal them. They were extras that the guys didn't eat. So I had a little valise, and I took them down there. And we had a good time chatting. He was from Germany, and I think he was from Germany. And he actually asked me what I thought about God, and he brought me to a saving grace with Jesus Christ, which I have walked with for the rest of my life, and my life is better for it. In October of last year, because of my pacemaker and the good Lord, I died 5 times. And the pacemaker brought me back. And just to make it real quick, I felt a terrible pain right here. It's like gas times 1,000. And I said to my wife, I've got chest pain. And that's all I could get out. And my son and grandson were sitting there with me. And I got up to fall over because I could see myself dying. And I saw a white cone, like an ice cream cone, pure white. And around that ice cream cone was a coil going down, 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 black coil. And I was riding that coil like a what do they call it at a fair? Not a Ferris wheel, but a
Roller coaster.
roller coaster, thank you. And I went down, 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 and I hit the dark spot. And it was triangular, and I remember it vividly. And I was going through that tunnel, and I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I started to hear the music of heaven. So many people have reported this as once they get through the tunnel into the light, they see all their relatives, all their friends, relatives that had gone on way before them, and they heard the heavenly music, and they saw the opaque gates. They're called the pearly gates sometimes, but the best description was the opaque, and they come up to that gate, but if they go in the gate, they don't come back. I came up to the light, very close to that light, so I don't need to live by faith any longer. I live because I saw the light.